1. Fight!
Hello everyone, Skippy here, and welcome to One Piece episode 903, an episode that is interesting for reasons other than its primary staff. While the episode itself is directed by Yusuke Suzuki from Yutaka Nakashima's board and supervised by Shuichi Ito, it's actually some of the key animators that we have on board here that I find a lot more interesting. D-Art Stagio, an animation studio based in Japan that is made up of American employees, is participating in this episode, with contracted talent like Henry Thurlow and freelance talent like French animator Sanda being among those participating in this episode. In the past, the studio has done work for anime such as Attack on Titan and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Golden Wind, but they've never actually worked on any Toei anime before, let alone One Piece. So not only does this mark the first time that Toei is working with the studio itself and its affiliated and employed talent, but it's also the first time that American and French animators of any sort are working on the One Piece anime, being guided by a very respective supervisor in form of Ito. Those two statements alone should explain why the episode itself is quite an important one, despite the fact that the preview for it didn't really show off anything amazing in terms of Sakuga. However, that doesn't mean that the talent on board isn't capable of having a few surprises in store here, especially when you consider that the title bout seems to be being extended a fair bit. So can episode 903 use the talent it's amassed to deliver a satisfying episode, or will it be more of a missed opportunity? Well, let's stomp our feet and find out. This episode covers the last 8 pages of chapter 916, and while there are some extensions, the episode follows the original source material almost one for one, and that is absolutely to its detriment. Due in part to the small page count, this episode is as slow as molasses, and it almost feels like every single big moment is stretched to hell and back, which absolutely kills all sense of tension or excitement. You retain very little from these huge moments like Luffy's sumo introduction or the final blow, because as a viewer, you're instead focused on why it's taking so damn long to get through what was sometimes just a few panels in the original manga. I'd like to say that the filler was enjoyable at the very least, because I did at least think that Law's little extended moment with Beppo was cute, but most of it ends up being just as boring as the rest of the episode outside of that, only tainting the experience even more. It's not a very enjoyable experience whatsoever, and when combined with Suzuki's really poor choice of OST and lack of ability to create any real atmosphere, the adaptation from anime to manga ends up being completely botched this episode, turning what was a pretty fast-paced and hilarious fight in the manga into a slow, boring slog. Now, while the episode itself is certainly very slow, the storyboard from Yutaka Nakashima manages to at least be pretty serviceable. While the board is certainly not one of Nakashima's absolute strongest by a long shot, he still manages to pepper it with that stylish flair that he's known for, framing the action at cool and different angles that makes what is otherwise pretty simple animation stand out more, playing around a bit with the sumo wrestling ring that Luffy and Urashima fight in, and trying out some simple yet interesting choreography. It's mainly the big fight of the episode that's any interesting in this board, with the rest of the episode playing it relatively safe in terms of compositions, despite Suzuki making up for his directorial shortcomings by adding in some interesting colors towards the start and some of that always cool new compositing all throughout. It overall stands as a decent storyboard that does have some rather cool shots in tow, but it's not one that you'll be recalling as special or impactful anytime in the near future. Now, usually this is where we'd be moving on to the highlight section of the breakdown, and while this episode certainly does have animation, I have to say that none of it is really worth highlighting. While our supervisor Shuichi Ito makes it a point to correct basically all of the animation here in order to make it look super polished, making his pancake faces and Ichikawa-like facial features once again at the forefront of the episode, a lot of the animation just ends up being serviceable animation in the long run that does house some interesting movement, but there's nothing that's outright extraordinary by any means, and when considering how this episode is most mostly action-centric, and is the first One Piece episode to house American and French animators at all, it ends up feeling really disappointing overall. I was going into this episode expecting a pretty decent but fun one going off the next episode preview, but what I instead got was probably the least enjoyable Wano episode so far, with the staff on board choosing to sacrifice the episode overall instead of finding new ways to make it more enjoyable like last week did. While it's not totally uncommon for the One Piece TV anime to sacrifice some episodes for the sake of future ones, it's a damn shame that an episode that had the potential to be a pretty fun and monumental one was the one being sacrificed here. The main question that I'm sure is on everyone's mind though is if the anime can manage to make a rebound with next week's episode featuring the return of supervisor Masayuki Takagi and episode director Masahiro Hosoda. While not a lot of content is really shown in the preview, you can see a bit of Takagi's angular yet round art and some pretty decent bits of action animation here and there, so hopefully we can at least manage to bounce back a little bit from this episode, even if it is just a little. Anyways guys, that's it for now. I'm Skippy, and bless Mayumi Tanaka for at the very least trying to make this episode worth it.